Von Ross, blessed be to your day. Maybe everything you require to create everything you desire. And understand that healing is destructive. Healing is destructive. You are deserving, but you're not entitled. And the level of honesty that it's going to take for you to break out of your comfort zone is going to challenge all of what you thought you were entitled to. I'm Papa Lucifer, your occult psychologist, your shadow shaman. And today I wanted to get into buying power. But before we get into buying power, join me on TikTok. Today's lesson in sitting in the shadow, the sitting in the shadow series was disassociation with self. It's a nice little 7-part. I put 7 2 times, but it's 7 parts. Join me on Gotta Co-Alchemist, my YouTube channel, to get subscribed to the deeper keys. And go ahead and support the lesson. I wanted to get into buying power. I wanted to get into understanding your buying power. I've talked about before, and we've gotten into your emotional credit score, your trauma being your co-signer, but I wanted to get into your buying power. And it was going against the lines of the disassociation with self. Through disassociating with ourselves, the disassociation with self is removing accountability and putting the accountability of our emotional energy in someone else, in something else's hands. Something similar as, I asked, if you work a schedule at your job, they're only responsible for you inside the 4 walls. I remember one thing that was always said to me through my managers, through the management team, my mentors, we're only responsible for you inside of the 4 walls. The only responsibility that we have is of you inside of the 4 walls, based onto your schedule. So it used to make me thinking about that schedule, if I wasn't scheduled, then why was I there? And it made me think about my buying power. I broke this down into 3 pieces. The aspects of renting to own, the accountability, your emotional carfax. What if you could look at yourself and someone could pull your emotional carfax? That means your track record. That means everything that you've been through. Would you be happy with the result? Would you allow someone to pull your emotional track record, your emotional carfax? This is a part of you owning your story and owning the aspects of yourself. Could you see someone sitting there line by line with your Carfax report in front of them before they make any offer or any deal? Any offer or any deal on the table. Put any deal on the table. Could you deal with that? When it comes to us selling ourselves into that sense, or pushing the pitch, that means pushing what we are. The lust bombing, because that's one thing that we do in the aspects of love bombing, lust bombing. We put ourselves into these situations. We put ourselves in situations based on trying to sell ourselves into that space. This is what I'm good at. This is what I do. I had to think about, these are things we got to think about in making normal in our conversations with ourselves. Remember, there's a difference between having an open conversation and having an honest conversation. There is a real big difference between having an open conversation and an honest conversation. You can have an open conversation and not necessarily be honest. And you can have an honest conversation and that forces you to be naturally open. So which side are you going to be on to that aspect? Then we got to think about those aspects with ourselves. It made me think about my buying power. It made me think about buying power by the terms of not the success inside of my lessons. See, the success inside of your lessons, that's your buying power. The lessons that you have learned, that gives you buying power. It's the difference between you going into a space and having to pay cash or use a higher amount of emotion into a space rather than you being able to use it based on credit. That means you're able, because of your carfax, because of your credit report, because of your internal, because of that internal healing work you're doing, your shadow work, you have a lower interest rate. The trustworthiness, the trust that you can go, the trust that you can apply to, the credibility that you can apply to is all in aspects. That's your buying power. See, when it comes to us not understanding ourselves or disassociating ourselves with disassociation with ourselves, we got to come with those conditions. We got to come with those conditions. We got to come with a state of mind to ourselves to where we're trying to sell ourselves into whatever space we go into. I had to really understand this with myself. When it came to why I was becoming stagnant. Why I was becoming stagnant. Why I became stagnant. Why I was always in a space with myself and I couldn't grow. Why I was in a space that no matter what I did inside of that space, there was no growth. There was no expansion. Why I was always finding myself in the job, it was all because of my buying power. See, when you're going into a space based on the traumatic events in your life, you're not doing this internal work, your buying power is pretty low. Your buying power is very low. Your credibility to yourself is very low. Even though that you have, and because your buying power is so low, this is when we talk about being stuck within the physical. This is when we talk about being stuck in the physical, stuck in the mental, and you stuck inside of that body. That emotional body, that identity that you cling to, because your buying power is so low. When the best way to explain it is you use your vehicle as a car, your body is that vehicle. But when I'm stuck on the physical aptitude of my body, I have to depend on the accessories that I attach to the body that give me a false sense of value. So I have to depend upon how I look at all times, how the perception of me at all times, what I think at all times, and staying relevant. The more that you go deeper inside of yourself, the less you seek relevance and the more you seek actual presence. The more that you actually start going inside of yourself internally, the less you seek relevance and the more you seek presence. Once again, if you go look at the TikTok, join me on TikTok, you look at the latest video, I was talking about, we're going to get deep this week into the disassociation with self. The disassociation with self is the ultimate aspect of taking away accountability for the things that have happened to me. My buying power, my accountability, the open accounts that I left open, based on not dealing with the things that were inside of my shadow. That set the tone for what I was able to subscribe to and how I subscribed to it and the interest rate, things of this nature. So now I'm looking at myself, and this is where you get into that sense of the lack mentality. And with that lack mentality, you're like, I wish I could do this. And why you go from deserving and doing the work to entitlement and thinking about time served. I did this and I've been in this and I've been in this relationship and this. And you keep getting stuck in that cycle. You just keep adding things to your carfax, your track record. You're so dependent upon your track record taking you somewhere because your track record or your traumatic track record, it took you to a certain point. It took you into certain spaces. It took you into certain doors. It gave you a certain ability. It gave you a certain sense of acceptance to your abandonment. It gave you a sense of this. It gave you those senses. It made you feel good about yourself. So you kept doing it. But now you're coming into a space with yourself where you're noticing that you're burning out faster. You're noticing that disassociation that you're so used to using, it's not giving you the same effects. You're noticing that in order for you to get the feeling the feeling to the actions with what you're doing, you're noticing that you have to do it more. That means, give an example. You're noticing that because of your pattern in a relationship, you're noticing that in order for you to regain and preserve that identity in that relationship, you're noticing that the arguments are you have to argue more. You got to have more arguments. You got to, every time you go into a space, you're noticing that you have to accept more. You got to accept more of, this is the way that I am, based on the mirror of, this is the way that you are. So you got to start accepting that more. You got to notice that you're going into spaces and you got to accept the judgment more. These are all aptitudes of you being stuck within that complacency. These are all aspects of me I used to be stuck in the complacency. That means every time that I told a story about myself, I had to realize why I was telling the story. Why I was so quick to tell that story. Remember, there's a difference between telling the story from a place there's a difference between telling the story from a place of ownership and then you telling your story like it's a pitch. I had to understand the difference between me telling my story or parts of my life like it was a pitch, like it was a sales pitch, versus me owning my aspects of my story. There's a big difference. Big difference. Woo! Ginger got me burning. There's a big difference. There's a big difference between you telling that story of the things that have happened to you inside of your life as a sales pitch to why you are the way that you are, and you telling that part of your story from a sense of ownership. That means the difference between telling somebody that you've been cheated on in relationships, you've been cheated on in every relationship, and you just want to, because you don't understand why, because you're a good person, and then understanding when you go tell the story, like, I've been through some relationships that have shown me that subconsciously the only reason that I accepted it is because that's all that I knew. That's where I seek comfort, because that's all that I ever seen. That's what I thought that I deserved. There's a difference in telling that story. And the understanding the difference in telling that story is that's what's going to give you that buying power. That's what's going to allow you to expand. That's what's going to allow you to invest deeper into yourself. Because every relationship, we must understand that every relationship that you come into is only going to mirror the individual aspects of myself. It's only going to mirror the individual aspects of myself. So the more that I've dealt with what I've seen in my own mirror, for example, I woke up today and I did my 5 times, and I do my 5 times a day in the mirror, calling my name, summoning myself to this space. I do that 5 times. I summon myself to the space. After I meditate, after I do my body scan, after I meditate, I go into the mirror and I summon myself to the space. Through gratitude, through that aspect. I summon myself to the space. And then I start the aspects of my day. My workout, followed by, after I do a video, edit the video, put it on my TikTok, look at the editing music, because today's Monday, so I'm working on the podcast. And I got into that process. But I had to understand that I had to assess my buying power before even getting to this point. See, a lot of times we're looking at ourselves and our spaces with ourselves, and we're looking from this point of I'm deserving, and we're trying to look at what it should look like, and that's what stops you. You're looking at the deal, what can happen, not stepping into what you know. See, this is something we gotta understand. You looking at the aspects of what it looks like or what it should look like, versus from what you know and what you've dealt with, and you know what you've dealt with on your carfax, your track record, what you've dealt with, what items have you settled on your carfax, your track record, and deleted from your credit report, versus what you keep trying to seal based on going into that space of you trying to rent to buy. You trying to rent to buy. You're in that rent to own your accountability. As long as this, it goes like this inside of a relationship, inside of a thought process. I've been through some things, but as long as you're here, I'll work on these things. As long as you promise to do this, this, and this, I should not have to go into a space and say that. That's attachment. That is attachment. If you promise to be here for me, I'm not used to people if you promise to be here for me in this way, shape, and form, I promise to work on myself. That is an unrealistic deal that you put onto the table. I had to understand it. That is how you breed trauma bonding into a space. Because now basically what you're setting the tone is, I had to understand, was I'm seeking recognition. Because now everything that I do has to attach to that point. See, I'm doing the work. See, I want you to see me doing the work, but then you got to understand, since you're living in that cycle, you have to do everything based on that. You got to do everything goes back to that. So when we think about this process and how we get to the process of something happens inside earlier into a relationship, friendship, job, or whatever, and it holds that memory inside of your mind, that's how it's held. That's how it's held inside of your mind. Whatever happened in your current, let's take a relationship right now. Some shit go on in a relationship right now. What they did, even if they apologize, change, evolve, you actually can see it, or it's actually present because you're still relevant to the first time that it happened in your life. Why does this keep happening to me? You're stuck in the why does this keep happening to me? Meanwhile, they've changed. What if they change? You have to go into this aspect. Your emotional ear has you stuck on what happened because you're looking at your buying power. Your buying power, that traumatic experience only gives you so much leeway. You only can haggle so much. You only can use it based on judgment. It's time served. Time served is based on judgment. You haven't expunged it from your record. You haven't deleted it. So every time that you go into a new space, every time you go into a new relationship, that's on the table. Every time you go into any space, that's on the table. Every time that you yell out that you're a good person, that's on the table. Well, you're a good person, but what happened in 98? You're a good person, but what happened in 2005? You're a good person, but what happened in this? And that is your key to owning that part of your story. See, there's a difference. I had to understand that attachment, I wouldn't want to own the part of my story. I would take in a rent to own with the accountability of it. That means naturally I put whoever was in that space that it happened to, I would talk about them first, then me. Because I was stuck in the victim mentality. I was stuck in the victim and the lack mentality. So naturally, in every space, I would tell my story from the point or the vantage point as a victim. Yeah, I was going through things in my life. I was going through some things, and they came into my life and they helped me out a lot. But the reason that they were helping me was because they had an ulterior motive. But I got to be honest with myself. I had an ulterior motive. Automatically, no matter what I had to say, I had an ulterior motive. That's the only reason I could speak it. My ulterior motive was to get myself back on my feet. My ulterior motive has always been to get myself back on my feet. So in any situation that I go into, I'm trying to get myself back on my feet. So the minute that I get myself back on my feet, then of course I'm naturally going to change. I'm naturally going to fall back into my pattern. See, you really got to be honest with yourself. That's how you started your pattern. I want to get myself back on my feet. So now you go into that space through the infatuation of the friendship and the relationship, and now you're looking at, this ain't what I thought it was. You changed. And you looking at it from the lack mentality. So them changing is bad. Because you think change is bad. Because you've been trained to learn behavior that every time you've seen change, it was always equipped to something bad. You're still looking at it from the space of the lack. Every time that, let's talk about the first change that you ever saw. When your mom and your dad broke up. Or your mom left. Or your dad left. Or the first time that you said something to your mother and your mother Your mother basically put you into a state with yourself where you were learning to suppress your emotions. That was a change. So that every time you see change, you equate change to being something negative. Every time that you had to change schools because you couldn't afford that, because your mom couldn't afford the house because she kept losing the money on the bag, or your dad was a junk, all these aspects, change becomes bad. Change becomes hope. Change automatically comes from the lack mentality that you're hoping for something. So since you stuck within that pattern of change being hope, you never assess the pattern or actually create a plan. So your plan is in that moment. Oh my God, this is the one. This is the one. And then you start looking back at your past, your track record, at everything that you've done. But here's the key. In that accountability, you got to look back at your track record and realize why you had certain things inside of your space. Why you did certain things. The first relationship with your baby father, or baby mothers, or baby fathers. And how you came into that, how it came to be. How you allowed yourself into that space. Remember, it's the emotional, not the physical aspect. It's the emotional. It's the feeling. If I'm sitting in my if you're sitting in the masculine wound, you're sitting in the wounds of what you knew. That means the traumatic experience is the masculine wound, is the masculine aspect. The feelings, the repressed feelings behind that, that's the feminine aspect. So if, let's say for the example, your mother didn't tell you who your father was in this example. Now you're sitting your mother was sitting in the masculine seat because she told you something, and now you sitting in the receptive seat of that feeling. So now every time that you go into any space, that's what you're seeking. Now you're seeking this over and over and over again. You're seeking recognition from anybody sitting in the masculine seat. Let's break down this aspect of talk about men and women. You sitting for recognition in every masculine and feminine seat. Because this is the aspect, you think about the relationships. I remember when I was in school, it was like the rise of the studs. Rise of the studs and the rise of lesbian relationships. And it was the rise of that masculine energy inside of that space from a wound. And then trying to portray something inside of a space. I remember seeing it. And I was like, damn, that shit's going up. But then every time you look into that space, it's like you're overcompensating. So when you look in your relationship where you at right now, based on being stuck in that physical, you seem to see yourself overcompensating. You're overcompensating for the lack of the feeling. So you're looking for the actions to match the feeling. So whatever you feeling in that underline, that's what you're searching for inside. You're searching for the actions. This is where we get into those expectations. That means if you're not used to asking questions, you're not used to asking for anything. And every time you ask for something, you look them in their face and you make up the expectation in your mind what the fuck they're saying. Even though they didn't even say anything. You quickly answer to avoid the rejection. You quickly answer to avoid the rejection wound. You quickly answer to avoid the abandonment wound. You quickly respond and overgive into that space to avoid the abandonment wound. You accept everything inside of that space because that's your buying power. That's all you can purchase. So now you rent to own the accountability or the emotional intelligence with yourself. So now you sitting in the space and you're like, but no. We talk about this all the time. You got to understand that emotional intelligence is going to be your key in everything that you do. Your emotional intelligence and understanding your emotions is the key between you keep buying into the obstacles or creating emotional voids, or you keep looking at the opportunities or looking at your resources. See, when I used to be stuck inside of that space, one of the biggest opportunities for myself, one of the biggest obstacles that I found was finding out about my family and things about myself in that nature. So like when I found out that, oh my God, like my pops ain't my pops. So that stepfather aspect was in my mind. So subconsciously in relationships, what I would attract later on in life, I would attract the mother with the kids. And I would see myself trying to be the best father figure I could be for the lack of the father figure that I had. So I would be sitting in the emotional seat, that feminine seat, that receptive seat, receiving everything that they said, listening to all of the problems, because it fit my narrative. And it wasn't just based on that part. It was based on also due to my mother and having this, I created this dialogue from my mother saying that I was the accident inside of that space, that I shouldn't have happened. That's how I thought stepkids happened. So now also I'm trying to prove to any person that I get with that it's not an accident that we met. Because this is what I'm destined to do. So I got stuck in that cycle. So everything that I did was based on that cycle. So now I'm looking for it. Now the gravity of all of my fears is always inside of that cycle. I'm trying to create something on a predestination. Nothing is based in my purpose. I'm not sitting in my own perspective. I'm sitting in the perceptions of others. Trying to remain selfless. Trying to allow them to create the emotional body. Not really taking care of myself. Not even on the aspects of the physical sense, because that was only a byproduct of the emotional and the mental sense. So I was stuck in that mentality. I was stuck in trying to be the man, be this aspect of myself. Now, here's the key. Just because I was doing it, and just because it was from a traumatic experience, it was from trauma bonding, does not mean that the things that I was doing were any less, does not mean that the things that I was doing inside of that space were any less valuable in order for me to learn. This is what we got to understand when it comes to the trauma. This is what we got to understand when it comes to these events that happen into our lives. This is why I'm always speaking on, when it comes to the traumatic experiences that have happened in your life, the first thing you got to accept is that you benefited from the traumatic experience. You benefited from it, because you would not be where you are at if you did not benefit from it. This is that level. This is the first levels of that. This is within the first levels of the honesty of stepping into that void. First levels of that honesty. When you start looking like, damn, I did benefit from it. I did benefit from my mother saying such negative things, because for a while I was pushing through that negative narrative. I was pushing through it. I needed that in my life. I needed that to set the tone of my value in my life. I needed that to set the tone of the buying power in my life. I needed how my pops talked to me. I needed that to set the precedent for how I set the tone inside of my life. But in order for me to remain inside of that lock of that space, that created a limitation. That gave me a forever handicap. Because now in every space that I go through, exactly, pushing through to prove them wrong. So now every space that I go into, that's my baseline. That's my baseline. I'm not even seeing the relationship. The relationship becomes a body for that emotional energy. It's like buying a used car. It's like getting a used car off the lot mentality. It's like buying a used car off of the lot mentality. It's like trying to sell that pitch to somebody to try to get picked up for the team. Hey, I'm a good guy. I do this, this, and this. So everything that I did was only based on, and we got to understand this, if everything that you're doing is only based on how good you are, and you're only going to go to the next level based on what somebody, you're trauma bonding. You trauma bonding. You're stuck in a victim mentality. Everything that I do before I get into any space, it's already natural to me. I remember thinking about when I would be at my jobs and like, I'm naturally clean. Oh, every space that you go into with yourself, you got to understand that if you're saying that I'm only going to do this, this, and this, and you got to give me this, this, and this for me to do this, this, and this, you're trauma bonding. It's a lack mentality. You're initiating that you have a lack mentality. Because if I go into a space as myself, not the identity, I'm not trying to preserve anything. That means I can accept anything that happens inside of that space. I have to accept it for what it is and do what needs to be done inside of that space. So I stop running from myself. See, it's easy for us to go into a space and say, you got to be this, 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 and this, and this, all of these, put everything on the table. But then when we look at ourselves, it's only based so we can run from ourselves. I think like, damn, it's only based because I'm running from myself. That's the only way that it worked, because I was running from myself. I'm running from myself the entire time. So that's why I stood so hard about them being this type of person, and this type of person, and this type of energy, and this type of aspect, and this type of aspect. Because I was running from myself. Because if I'm doing all of that, later on down the line, I'm going to have, hey, you got it, but I don't got time. Why every time I want to do something, it got to be a stipulation to it? You supposed to love me for me and accept me for me. You knew who I was when you met me. This is me. Stuck in that narrative. How long this gonna happen before we get to the next level? I'm not worried about the level. Because one thing that I always said I had to get comfortable with saying with myself, didn't realize I was saying this mantra, was regardless of whoever's inside of the space, I'm still going to continue to do what I'm doing when it comes into becoming with growth. Regardless. Whatever's inside of that space, I'm going to continue doing what I'm doing when it comes to the aspects of growth. The problem with me saying that was not the fact that I was saying it. That wasn't the problem. It was what it was attached to. It was attached to disassociation with self. That's what I attached it to. I didn't attach it to the power of detachment. I was attaching it to disassociation with self. Because that always kept me in a comparison mindset. Because every time that I did something, because every time that I did some shit inside of a space with myself, every time that I did something, said something, I always came back to that comparison. I always went right back to that point. Well, I've been doing this for the last 2 weeks, this for the last couple months, this for the last couple of, I did this, and this. I always had an auditing sheet inside of the space. Every single time. So now they got to live by that. So nobody's good enough. Because in my own self, I wasn't good enough. That was the reality to it. I wasn't good enough. So if somebody actually did what I wanted them to do, I had to put something else in there because it was making them get closer to me. That was that fear of abandonment. That was that fear of that was that fear of rejection. That was that fear of the wound. That was that fear coming up. So my buying power, I kept renting to own. In that mentality of renting to own the accountability. That means, okay, here's another list of things that has to be done. So now I got to understand that every space that I was going into, I wasn't even seeing the person, they were a body. Because when I go back and look at the relationships, before when I was from the unhealed space of going and looking at relationships, I'm looking at them as fucking bodies. They look nice. And then I got comfortable with saying like, yo, shorty was bad, but she was crazy. And then I get stuck in the variations of, yeah, you know the bad ones is crazy. You know the ones with good pussy is crazy. You know the niggas they crazy. They ain't got nothing going on for themselves. So now you got to think about what the fuck you saying. From that traumatic experience, are you seeking recognition for your external accomplishments? Because think about it like this. Your buying power looks real good when you're dealing with someone that you know has done less work than you. Your buying power looks real good when you know that person and you're used to exploiting, since you're used to exploiting your traumas and your wounds, and you think that that's vulnerability, that's exposure, you're used to exposing other people's wounds to use in your favor. The only way you can use it is if yours is still present. I'm tired of this, Nick. I'm tired of this, bitch. I'm tired of these. And you get stuck in that space. But everything's only based on the mirror of your... I'm an empath, and I feel niggas' power. I feel everybody's energy connecting to me. In order to become truly sit in the seat of an empath, you got to deal with your own sympathies. In order to tap into any other power, to the higher aspects of self, you got to deal with the negatives of that aspect, that space. In order for me to do what, I have to become transparent in myself first. That way, when I go into a space, I can hear, I can listen, I can hear, I can read the energy clearly. When I go into a space, I'm not worried about my energy being poured into the space or what they're trying. I'm not worried about them trying to attach to my energy. I know that's gonna happen to me because that's my buying power. My credit score. I'm present. I can own everything that's on my line by line. I can own the times where I wasn't shit in every line. Because here's the key, and I talked about this in the TikTok video. I want you to remove that you are a 10 and you are perfect. The only thing that is perfect is death. That's why, because you thinking that you're perfect because you're a good person, everything is testing you to break you being in this stagnant aspect of being this good person. Because in the reality of it, the only reason that you cling to such a variable is because if you really look back at your track record and really do that dive into yourself, you got to let go of that hurt that made you a good person. You got to let go of the uses of you got to let go of using that hurt that makes you a good person. You got to let go of that traumatic event that made you a good person. You got to let go of it. And that's a hard thing to do. That's the weight. That's where you're afraid to invest. Because now you come to a point in time where it's time to invest into you, and you're used to only investing on the romanticizing the investment into yourself on physical aspects, but you never did the investment into self. See, that investment into self, that's a demolition. The investment into yourself in your healing work is a demolition project. Similar to that saw you hear in the background. That's demolition of that old foundation. See, you can't build things on the old foundation. If every time you find yourself in a situation and you find yourself reacting by saying, "Hey, I've been through a lot of shit," you're being triggered to let you know that you're trying to build on the old foundation of self. You're trying to build on the old foundation of self. You're trying to renovate your property. You're trying to renovate a burning house. You can't renovate a burning house, let it burn down. Man, all I gotta do is switch out the engine. All I gotta do is switch out the engine. I can drive just a couple more miles. Just get rid of the damn car. Because you're afraid to walk in your own shit. It's easy. I can go change out the engine, change out my engine. I can just change out my transmission. I can just change out the wheel bearings. And I can just keep driving. All because you're afraid to walk in your own shit. You're afraid to walk. It's okay. In order to be reborn, you must die first. That means everything gotta die. All the plants. Soon as you change out the transmission, the fuel pump go out. Soon as you change the fuel pump, the radiator go out. So what is the use of trying to replace parts, but trying to run it at, you can't run it at that same rate of speed anymore. Because you feel that's what you deserve. That's all you've ever known. That's what I got used to. It's okay. It's time to really assess. That's all that's left right now is assessment. You're in a time of assessment. You're in a time to invest. What you've seen externally is letting you know that it's time to invest. It's time to rebrand yourself. It's time to assess your brand, assess your representation, and it's time. That's what it's time for. Instead of reacting to everything like, oh my God, they're trying to kill us and stop us, it's time to rebrand yourself. That's all. That's what it's time for. Every day that I wake up, it's a new brand coming to the table. I got a new brand on the table, and I'm assessing the brand. So by the time I get to that brand, I'm ready for it. Everything that I desire is already in play. All I got to do is, when I get there, I can turn the lights on. Click, turn the lights on. I ain't got to worry about nothing. Up, turn the lights on. Up, open up. I can already do that because I'm doing that work now. The gratitude is the ultimate stream to tap into your gratitude is going to be removing the how long from your life. You get stuck in that how long. You get stuck in that when. You get stuck in that how long and that when and that what and that where. And you get so separated away from the why. Are you making conscious decisions? Are you making the conscious decisions that are based on where you're trying to go or where you used to be? I can't wait to get back to when I can go. I'm not thinking about that anymore. Your purpose and your purpose of you sitting in your perspective is the ability to sit in your space and you don't have to run away from anything anymore. You can actually sit there and not run away. That means no matter where you're at, like I always use this example, no matter where I'm at, my office is anywhere that I can sit. This is my office on the balcony. My office can be in the bedroom. My office can be anywhere. So when I get to the point to where that office comes into fruition, I'm already ready for it. I'm already there. I've already learned to deal with I've already learned how to assess my standards and never compromise my standard in the values of everything that I'm delivering. Because my standards, my structure, my stability are all outside of my comfort zone. My buying power is outside of my comfort zone. This is when no more trauma bonds, no more attachment. I can assess projection. Now, this is when you start doing your assessments. But it's going to take you doing that internal work. That's why you're in the position that you're in now, because it's time to do that work. You can dance around it. It'll work. It'll work for a little bit to dance around it. But eventually you're going to have to do that work. Why put off tomorrow what you can do today? If you told me 7 to 8 years ago I'd be speaking, teaching, and providing services, counseling, all of the things that I'm doing now, I couldn't see it. I couldn't see it. I didn't understand the value in it. Couldn't see the shit. I was still stuck on one stream of thought. One stream of thought giving me everything that I was entitled to. Broken inside of that space. The thing that kept me there was being stuck in the void. The echoes that I've talked about this before. The echoes that were inside of my mind telling me not to take that jump, not to make that move. Because I looked inside of my space, and the only examples I had of people making jumps was in the reflection of watching them and what they got stopped by. So their perception is what held me hostage. Until I was comfortable with my own perspective. It's time to stop disassociating with self. Once again, Join me on TikTok. This week's video is Disassociated with Self. It's a nice little 7-parter. Join. Hit that follow link on there because I put a lot of keys breakdowns on there that I don't put on here. Godico Alchemist, my YouTube channel for the nightly keys. For those nightly keys, every 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for the class. And when you ready, like, hit me up in the inbox. All services from readings, the big boy consultation, seeing how the next going to the next aspects of therapy, giving you that space so you can open yourself up, because that's all I do as a guide. Because I desire you to be the fucking best. That's all. I desire you to be the fucking best. Because that's what I desire of myself. I desire you to be the fucking best. Understanding that this healing is destructive. You are deserving of everything that you desire. But you are not entitled to it without doing that internal work. So yeah. Oh yeah. And to end it out, this week on the God Hour podcast, we're going to be getting into perceptions rift. Yesterday, I made a post about the aspects of, we're going to get deeper into the methodology of the disassociation with self versus the power of detachment. So 6 p.m., dropping a new episode every Tuesday, streaming on multiple platforms. Y'all stay tuned for that information. Oh shit, go back. Also, if you have a product, if you have a service, you have a product or a service, you want to do a build on a podcast episode, you want to do that build into that aspect, hit me up. Let's talk about the sponsorship. Plug talk, you get it free. Talk about that monthly sponsorship. Let's get this, because all I want is, let's be great. But we got to start with internally with yourself. It's time to check that track record out. Stop being afraid to become vulnerable with yourself and become the fucking best. Ain't nothing stopping you but you. I love you. We love us. Ashe.